Ready for an adventure?
Always.
Awesome! Today we're diving deep into the world of organisms and their habitats.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
It is, and we've got a fantastic source to guide us, FESI106.pdf.
This looks like a great resource. Lots of fascinating science about life on Earth.
Exactly. We're going to explore how life thrives in all sorts of incredible places, from scorching deserts to the highest mountain peaks.
It's mind-blowing how life adapts to such diverse environments.
It really is. So, have you ever wondered how a camel survives in the desert?
And now that you mention it, how do they manage with so little water?
Well, we're going to uncover those secrets and so much more.
I can't wait. I've always been fascinated by how nature shapes its inhabitants in such unique ways. It's like nature's grand experiment, constantly testing and refining those tools of survival.
I love that analogy, nature's toolbox. But before we get into all that, let's start with a fundamental question, shall we?
Plus,
What really makes something living?
the age-old question. Our source actually uses a funny little poem about talking chairs and tables to illustrate the difference between living and non-living things.
It's a clever way to get us thinking about the things we often take for granted, isn't it? I mean, we know a chair can't just get up and walk around.
Right. But what exactly sets us apart from inanimate objects? Well, living things, they share a set of key characteristics.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, they need nourishment, right,
Mm.
to fuel all those amazing activities.
Of course, gotta eat to live.
Exactly. And then there's respiration. They take in oxygen, release carbon dioxide. It's like a constant exchange with the environment.
So when I jump back after touching a hot stove, that's me responding to a stimulus, am I right?
You got it. That's a classic example of your body interacting with its environment.
Cool. So what else?
Well, living things also reproduce, passing on their genes to the next generation. And they move and grow, though not always in the ways we might expect.
Right, think about plants. They don't exactly run around, but they grow and spread in fascinating ways.
Exactly. And of course, eventually, all living things experience death. It's the natural end of a life cycle.
It is a natural part of life, which brings up an interesting thought. Are there any times where the line between living and non-living gets a bit blurry? Our source mentions the example of a dormant seed.
Yes, the dormant seed. It's not actively growing or moving, so is it really alive?
It's a good question.
It is. And it highlights the complexity of trying to define life in absolute terms. You see, a dormant seed, it's like a tiny time traveler, just waiting for the right conditions to awaken and spring into action.
It's incredible to think about all that potential packed into something so small.
Isn't it? Okay, so now that we've touched upon what makes something living, let's move on to the concept of habitat, which the source defines as that dwelling place that provides everything an organism needs to survive.
Makes sense. It's their home, their address in the world.
Precisely. And this brings us to another key concept, adaptation. This is the remarkable process that allows organisms to thrive in their specific habitats.
So it's like nature's way of customizing each living thing to its environment, right?
Exactly. Over time, organisms develop special features, those tools in nature's toolbox, to help them overcome the challenges of their surroundings. And this is what leads to the incredible diversity of life we see on Earth.
It's mind-blowing, the variety of life out there.
It really is.
So, are you ready to start our exploration of these different habitats?
Absolutely. Where do we begin?
Well, let's jump right into one of the most extreme environments on the planet, the scorching desert.
Ooh, the desert. Imagine yourself standing under that blazing sun, surrounded by endless sand dunes.
It's easy to picture temperature soaring and water. Well, water's a precious, precious commodity.
Survival in the desert requires some serious resilience and resourcefulness.
Absolutely. We've already touched on camels and how they conserve water, those long legs, the ability to go days without drinking. It's remarkable.
It is. But what about other desert dwellers? How do they cope?
Well, think about desert rats and snakes. They've evolved a different strategy.
Oh, I'm curious. Tell me more.
They burrow deep into the sand during the day.
That makes sense. Creating a cool subterranean refuge from the scorching heat. It's like having a built-in underground air conditioner.
Exactly. Speaking of adapting to extreme conditions, desert plants, especially cacti, have always fascinated me.
Oh, cacti are masters of survival in those harsh conditions.
They are. Tell us about some of their adaptations.
Well, their leaves have been reduced to spines. This minimizes water loss. And that thick, fleshy stem, it's like a water storage tank, allowing them to endure those long periods of drought.
It's a brilliant strategy. I actually remember reading about a classroom experiment where a cactus and a leafy plant are placed in the sun to compare water loss. The cactus barely loses a drop, while the leafy plant wilts dramatically.
That's a powerful visual, isn't it? A great way to illustrate the concept of adaptation.
It is. But even with their incredible adaptations, cacti still face challenges.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a constant back and forth, a delicate balance. Nature is always pushing and pulling, shaping and reshaping life in the most fascinating ways.
Well said. So, from the arid desert, let's journey to another extreme environment. What do you say we head to the towering mountain regions?
Let's go to the mountains.
I can almost feel that wind whipping through my hair as I stand on a rocky mountain peak. It's cold, windy, often blanketed in snow.
It's a completely different set of challenges compared to the desert.
It is. Survival here demands a whole new set of adaptations. Even the trees have to adapt.
You're right. Think about those majestic trees clinging to the mountainsides. They typically have that cone shape with sloping branches.
That's right. Perfect for shedding snow and preventing those branches from breaking under the weight of winter.
Exactly. And their needle-like leaves, those reduce water loss. They're like nature's skyscrapers, built to withstand the harshest of storms.
It's amazing how they stand so tall against the elements. But what about the animals that brave this mountain climate? How do they survive?
They've got their own remarkable adaptations. Take the yak, for instance. They have those thick, shaggy coats to combat the frigid temperatures.
Of course. And what about snow leopards?
Snow leopards, they've got that thick fur all over their bodies, including their paws. It's insulation for traversing the snowy terrain.
Ah, clever. And don't forget those sure-footed mountain goats.
Right. They've got those strong hooves, perfectly designed for navigating treacherous, rocky slopes. It's like they have built-in climbing gear.
It's incredible how life finds a way to thrive, from the searing heat of the desert to those icy mountain peaks. But before we venture into other habitats, I think it's worth revisiting our earlier discussion about what defines life. What do you think?
Agreed. It's a good time to recap those characteristics that distinguish living things from non-living things.
Especially when we consider the amazing diversity of life on Earth.
Absolutely. And our source does a fantastic job of breaking it down, even revisiting that poem about talking furniture. It's a good reminder of the fundamental difference.
It is. But, sometimes it's still tricky. How do we really know if something is alive? I mean, we see cars and clouds moving, even growing, but we wouldn't call them living organisms.
You've hit on a crucial point. While non-living things might display certain characteristics of life, they don't possess all of them, all at the same time, or in the same way.
I see. So a cloud might grow larger as it gathers water, but it's not growing the same way a plant does, by creating new cells and tissues.
Exactly. And a car might move, but it's not moving on its own.
Yeah.
Seeking food or shelter like an animal would.
It needs a driver. There's a big difference there.
Right. Living things, they have that complex interplay of processes. Let's delve into a few of those. Let's start with respiration.
Okay. We all know we need to breathe, but what's really going on at a biological level when we respire?
Well, think of it as converting food into that usable energy, the fuel that keeps us going. And that involves taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. It happens in both plants and animals.
Ah, so we breathe through our lungs, fish use gills to get oxygen from the water, and plants, well, they exchange gases through those tiny pores on their leaves, right? Stomata, I think they're called.
That's right. And those stomata, they're like tiny gateways. They regulate gas exchange and even water loss, essential for a plant's survival.
It's amazing how these different organisms have evolved such diverse ways to do the same thing. Breathe.
It is. And even those dormant seas we talked about earlier, they're still respiring, just at a much slower rate.
Wow. It's fascinating to think about all these processes happening all around us, all the time, often invisibly.
It is. And speaking of fascinating processes, let's talk about response to stimuli. Remember when you touched the hot stove earlier?
Yeah, how could I forget? My hand still remembers.
Right. Well, that ability to sense and react to changes in the environment, that's a hallmark of living things.
So it's how they interact with the world around them.
Exactly. Think about some everyday examples. You step on a thorn, you immediately pull your foot away. You smell your favorite food, your mouth starts to water. Your eyes adjust to the sunlight. These are all responses to stimuli.
Right. And those responses aren't limited to humans. Animals react to food, danger. Even plants respond.
You're right. Think about it. Flowers opening and closing with the changing light. Roots growing towards water. These are all examples of plants interacting with their environment.
Oh, it reminds me of the mimosa plant that touch me not. When you touch its leaves, they fold up.
Yes, that's a dramatic response. So we see that living things are constantly taking in information from their surroundings and reacting to it. It's an ongoing conversation.
They're tuned in. Now, what about excretion? We don't always talk about that, but it's pretty essential for life.
It is.
Yeah.
Living things, we take in food and water. But what happens to the waste products?
Good point.
They have to be eliminated. That's what excretion is all about. Our bodies have these complex systems for filtering and removing waste.
And plants excrete too, right? Just in less obvious ways than animals.
Precisely. They might store waste in certain parts or release them as secretions.
So no matter what form life takes, it produces byproducts that need to be dealt with.
Absolutely. And now let's talk about the most fundamental characteristic of life. Reproduction.
That drive to create offspring to ensure the continuation of the species.
Exactly. And as with all the other characteristics, the methods of reproduction, they're incredibly diverse.
Right, think about it. Some animals lay eggs, others give birth to live young. Plants have seeds, spores, even budding.
It's a beautiful variety. And our source even points out that you can grow a new potato plant from just a piece of a potato with a bud. It even suggests trying to grow a plant from a cutting.
That's a fun way to engage with the concept of reproduction.
It is. And even if it's not always successful, it helps us understand the process better.
It's a hands-on approach.
Yep.
So to recap, we've covered nourishment, respiration, response to stimuli, excretion, movement, growth, and reproduction. Quite the list of characteristics that define life.
We can't forget the final inevitable characteristic, death.
Of course.
It's a natural part of the cycle, making way for new generations.
I see. And without reproduction, well, species wouldn't persist over time.
Exactly.
It's quite sobering when you think about it, but also a reminder of life's resilience.
It is.
You know, our source actually poses a really interesting question. Do we always find these characteristics neatly dividing the living from the non-living?
You know, it really challenges our tendency to try and put everything into those neat little categories.
Absolutely. And there are some fascinating gray areas, like that mung seed, remember? Just sitting in a shop, it doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. But under the right conditions, that seemingly inert seed can sprout and grow into a whole new plant.
It's a great example.
So is it alive even when it's not actively exhibiting all those characteristics we just talked about?
It's a thought-provoking question. And the source brings up another intriguing example. A sack of wheat. Those seeds might appear dormant, but they're still respiring, generating heat as they break down stored energy.
It really highlights the fact that life can be subtle, sometimes hidden from our view.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's more about potential than outward activity.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question we started with. What is life, really?
It's a question that has kept philosophers and scientists busy for centuries. And while our source doesn't offer a definitive answer, it does leave us with a beautiful sentiment. Life is beautiful.
And after exploring just a little bit of the diversity and complexity of living organisms, I think we can all agree with that statement.
Definitely.
Life in all its forms is something to be cherished and explored. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we have another thought-provoking question for you to ponder.
It really makes you wonder if our definitions of life are maybe a bit too rigid.
Right, like maybe instead of thinking of it as this binary living or are non-living, maybe it's more like a spectrum.
A spectrum of life. I like that.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new way of thinking about it, doesn't it?
It really does. But for now, let's continue our journey through those different habitats, shall we?
Absolutely. Lead the way.
All right, so from those dramatic mountain heights, let's head down to those vast, open grasslands.
The grasslands.
Imagine a sea of golden grasses swaying in the wind, stretching as far as you can see.
It's a pretty breathtaking sight.
It is, and the grasslands are a place where that drama of life and death plays out on a grand scale. It's a dynamic ecosystem.
With its own unique set of challenges and adaptations, of course.
Of course, and our source actually focuses on a classic example of this. Lions and deer.
Ah, the predator-prey relationship, a classic for a reason.
It really is. It shapes so much of life in the grasslands. Let's talk about the lion's adaptations for hunting, those tools in nature's toolbox.
Well, lions, they've evolved to be stealthy and powerful predators. Their coats, that tawny color, blends right in with the dry grasses.
Yeah, it's amazing how they just disappear into the landscape.
It's fantastic camouflage for stalking their prey. And their eyes, they're forward-facing, which allows for super precise depth perception.
Ah, crucial for ambushing those unsuspecting prey.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are the claws, those retractable claws. They're kept razor sharp, hidden until just the right moment.
It's like having a secret weapon tucked away.
You got it. And deer, on the other hand, they become masters of evasion.
Well, their survival depends on it, doesn't it? Outrunning those powerful predators.
Absolutely. Deer have strong teeth for grazing on those tough grasses, and their hearing super keen. Plus, their eyes are on the sides of their heads.
Giving them almost 360-degree vision.
Right. They can spot danger coming from almost anywhere. And of course, there's their speed and agility. That's their ultimate defense. They can outrun predators across those open plains.
It's a constant back and forth, an evolutionary arms race.
You said it. Both predator and prey constantly evolving to gain an advantage.
It's fascinating. But it's not just lions and deer out there, right? The grasslands are teeming with life.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the vast herds of grazing animals like zebras and wildebeest. They're a classic sight.
And all the burrowing animals. Those underground networks created by prairie dogs and ground squirrels.
It's like a whole hidden world beneath our feet.
It is. And don't forget the birds of prey soaring overhead.
Oh, right. Hawks and eagles, their keen eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of movement.
Always on the lookout.
Always.
You know, it's interesting. The source mentions that grasslands aren't all created equal. There are savannas, prairies, steppes, even pampas.
Oh, you're right. Grasslands are incredibly diverse.
What can you tell us about the different types?
Well, savannas, like those in Africa, they have those scattered trees, a mix of grasses and shrubs. They're home to elephants, giraffes, lions, so many incredible animals.
Savannas have always seemed so full of life.
They are. And then you have prairies, like those in North America. They're mostly tall grasses, very few trees. And the soil is super fertile. They support huge herds of bison and pronghorn.
It's amazing how they've evolved in response to the climate, the soil, all these different factors.
It really speaks to the power of adaptation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we can't forget about the steppes. Those are those vast, dry grasslands you find in Central Asia. And then there are pampas, the fertile grasslands of South America.
Many different types of grasslands.
Each one presenting its own set of challenges and opportunities, shaping the life that flourishes there.
It makes you appreciate just how diverse our planet is. But from those wide open spaces, I think it's time we dive into a different kind of vastness, the oceans.
The oceans.
A world that covers more than 70% of our planet's surface. Imagine yourself floating weightlessly, surrounded by shimmering schools of fish, the gentle sway of kelp forests.
It's magical, isn't it?
It is, and the oceans are teeming with life, so different from what we find on land. We've already touched on fish and their adaptations.
Their streamlined bodies, those gills for breathing underwater.
Right. But there's a whole other world of creatures out there, each with its own unique way of life. One group that fascinates me is cephalopods. Squid and octopus,
Ah, yes. The masters of disguise and deception.
They can change color, shape. It's incredible.
It is. Their bodies are incredibly flexible,
Oh,
They can squeeze through the tiniest spaces, mimic other animals, even disappear right into their surroundings.
it's like they have superpowers.
They do. And they use those shape-shifting abilities for hunting and defense. They can flash bright colors to startle predators or blend in perfectly to ambush their prey. And they're smart. Really smart. Capable of complex problem-solving, even tool use.
It's mind-boggling how they've evolved to thrive in such a challenging environment.
It is. And then there are marine mammals. Creatures like dolphins and whales. They return to the water after evolving on land.
It's a fascinating example of how adaptable life can be.
Dolphins and whales, they're air-breathing mammals, but they've developed these amazing adaptations for life in the water. Streamlined bodies, powerful tails for propulsion, a layer of blubber to keep them warm.
And of course, those blowholes. They're pretty unique.
Right. Those blowholes let them breathe air from the surface while spending most of their time underwater. They've even figured out how to sleep without drowning.
How do they do that?
They rest one half of their brain at a time.
Whoa, so the other half stays alert.
Exactly. They've basically hacked sleep.
It's brilliant. And then, of course, there are the deep sea creatures, living in a world of perpetual darkness, crushing pressure.
That's a world we're only just beginning to understand.
Yeah.
Full of such bizarre and fascinating creatures.
They're like aliens.
Well, they've definitely adapted to survive in an environment that would be lethal to most other organisms. A lot of them have bioluminescent organs.
The ones that produce light.
Exactly. They use it for communication, attracting prey, even confusing predators.
It's like they've created their own underwater light show.
And their bodies, they're built to withstand that intense pressure. often soft, gelatinous bodies or special structures that prevent them from being crushed.
It's incredible how life finds a way, even in the most extreme conditions.
It really is a testament to life's resilience and adaptability. And we've only scratched the surface. The oceans are full of life yet to be discovered.
It's exciting to think about what else might be out there. So from the saltwater realms of the oceans, let's shift gears a bit, head to those freshwater ecosystems. Ponds and lakes.
Ponds and lakes.
Imagine standing on the bank of a still pond. Dragonflies darting across the surface, frogs croaking from the reeds, those lily pads floating serenely.
Such a peaceful image.
It is. Ponds and lakes, they're like miniature worlds teeming with life.
And they're so important. They're a vital part of our planet's freshwater ecosystems. So many plants and animals depend on them.
Speaking of plants, the source mentions how aquatic plants have evolved all sorts of adaptations for life in the water. Some have roots that anchor them to the bottom, others just float freely on the surface.
Right. And those submerged plants, they often have long, thin leaves that bend easily with the currents.
So they don't get damaged.
Exactly. Some have finely divided leaves, letting the water flow right through, and those that float, like lily pads, they have that waxy coating.
Keeps them from sinking.
Exactly. It's like they've engineered their own little flotation devices.
So clever. But what about the creatures that call ponds and lakes home? I'm thinking of amphibians, like frogs. They're a great example of adaptation, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. They bridge the gap between water and land.
Living a double life.
Right. Powerful hind legs for leaping on land, webbed feet for swimming in water, and their skin is permeable. They can absorb water and oxygen directly through it.
It's incredible. And of course, there are turtles, water snakes. They're fully adapted to life in the water.
Streamlined shells for swimming. The ability to hold their breath for long periods. It's fascinating.
It really is. Even in a seemingly small ecosystem like a pond, there's just so much diversity and adaptation.
It's like a microcosm of the larger world. It really showcases the ingenuity of life.
It does. We've journeyed from scorching deserts to towering mountains, vast grasslands, deep oceans, and those tranquil ponds and lakes. It's amazing to see the different ways life has adapted to thrive in each unique environment.
And through it all, we've seen that life doesn't always fit neatly into our definitions. It's a spectrum, always evolving and adapting to the challenges and opportunities of the natural world.
It's a powerful insight. But before we wrap up, I have one more question. We've focused on plants and animals that we can see, but what about the microscopic world?
The microscopic world.
Yeah, what kind of adaptations might we find there in that realm of microorganisms?
Oh, that's a great question. We've only just begun to explore the microscopic world, and it's teeming with life that's just as diverse and fascinating as the macroscopic world.
It's like a whole other universe, right there under our noses, invisible to the naked eye.
You got it. And those microorganisms, they've developed their own incredible adaptations for survival. Think about extremophiles. They thrive in conditions that we would consider completely inhospitable. Scalding hot springs, acidic pools, even the frigid depths of glaciers.
It's hard to even imagine.
They're like the ultimate survivors, pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible for life.
Absolutely. And how do they do it?
Well, they've evolved these remarkable biochemical strategies to withstand extreme temperatures, pressures, and chemical environments.
I see. So like some extremophiles have enzymes that function perfectly at temperatures that would destroy the proteins in most other organisms.
Exactly. It's like they've rewritten the rules of biology.
And their adaptations, they're not just fascinating from a scientific perspective, right? They have potential for things like biotechnology and medicine.
Oh, absolutely. Scientists are exploring how we can use their unique enzymes and metabolic pathways for all sorts of things, developing new drugs, cleaning up environmental pollutants. The possibilities are vast.
So even those tiniest organisms, the ones we can't even see, can have a huge impact.
They really can. It's a testament to the fact that every living thing, no matter how small, plays a role in the interconnected web of life.
And that's a perfect segue to our next point. We've been talking about microscopic life, those plants and animals we can see, but now let's dive into the microscopic world.
Into the invisible world.
It's a world full of its own wonders and adaptations, shaping our planet in ways we're only just beginning to understand. It really is amazing to think about this whole hidden world right there under our noses, all those microorganisms going about their lives.
And they're not just passive passengers, Microorganisms have played such a crucial role in shaping our planet, even ourselves.
Now that you mention it, I do remember reading somewhere that the human body contains trillions of bacteria.
Trillions. Yeah, and a lot of them are actually beneficial to our health.
Right, like they help us digest our food, right?
Exactly. They produce vitamins. They even help train our immune systems. It's like we're not just individuals.
We're ecosystems, walking, talking ecosystems.
Exactly. But back to those microscopic adaptations we were talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, the ways these tiny organisms have adapted to survive, it's truly remarkable.
It is. What are some specific examples in those really extreme environments?
Well, let's talk about tardigrades. You ever heard of them?
Tardigrades.
Yeah. They're also called water bears or moss piglets.
Moss piglets.
I know, right? But they're incredibly resilient. They can survive extreme temperatures, radiation, dehydration, even the vacuum of space.
Wait, seriously? Space? They sound like something out of a science fiction movie.
They're the real deal.
Yeah.
And the way they do it is pretty fascinating. They have this ability to enter a state of suspended animation. It's called cryptobiosis.
Cryptobiosis.
Yeah, they basically shut down their metabolism, almost completely dehydrate their bodies. It's how they withstand conditions that would be lethal to anything else.
And then they can rehydrate and just come back to life.
Like nothing happened. It's like having a pause button for life.
It's incredible. What else? What other extreme survivors are there?
Well, there are the thermophiles. Those are the organisms that thrive in super hot environments, like hot springs and hydrothermal vents.
Those are the places where superheated water comes out of the Earth's crust, right?
Exactly. We're talking hundreds of degrees Celsius. And thermophiles, they've evolved these special enzymes and cellular components that are stable at those temperatures.
It's like they figured out how to live in a boiling cauldron.
Pretty much. And then you have the psychrophiles. They're the opposite. They love the cold. Glaciers, polar seas, those are their homes.
So their adaptations must be completely different, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
They have proteins and cell membranes that stay flexible at low temperatures.
So they don't freeze solid.
Right. And their enzymes function best in the cold. It's like they've each found their own niche, their own way to thrive.
It's amazing the range of adaptations out there. From boiling hot to freezing cold, life finds a way.
It's a testament to the power of evolution. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover in both the macroscopic and the microscopic worlds.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to wrap things up on. We've journeyed from scorching deserts to towering mountains, vast grasslands, deep oceans, tranquil ponds, and lakes. We even took a peek into the microscopic world. It's been quite the adventure.
It has. And through it all, we've seen just how adaptable life is, how resilient. Life doesn't always fit neatly into our definitions. It pushes the boundaries, finds a way to thrive, even in the most extreme conditions.
From the smallest microbe to the largest whale, every organism plays a part in this interconnected web of life. It's something to marvel at.
Absolutely. And we encourage everyone to keep exploring, to keep asking those questions, to keep that sense of wonder alive. Who knows what amazing adaptations we might uncover next?
Well said. Until our next deep dive, keep those curious minds engaged. Thanks for joining us.